Hola y bienvenidos a esta lectura. Today we're talking about the imperfect versus the preterit tense. So in previous lectures, I've talked about how to form or conjugate the imperfect tense. And in the previous course, I talked about how to conjugate in the preterit tense. This lecture will be dedicated to talking about the contextual usage of these two tenses, as both of them really are Spanish past tense, but they require different contexts to be appropriately used. It's quite complex. It's, in my opinion, the most difficult part about using past tense in Spanish. And so hopefully just a few things that I'm going to introduce to you here today will help you navigate these complexities. So just a brief introduction here, just to kind of maybe jog your memory about the different conjugations. You have a sentence something like, I ate rice yesterday, and the preterit conjugation for the yo form would be comí arroz ayer. And at this point, if maybe that comí is seeming a little unfamiliar to you, you might want to go back and review the preterit conjugations. Because again, what we're focusing on aren't necessarily the formations of these verbs, but their contextualized use. The second example we have, I ate rice all the time. And in Spanish, we would actually conjugate this in the imperfect tense using the comía arroz todo el tiempo. The exact same verb you can see in English, I ate, right? Well, one implies sort of a single occurrence defined in past tense. The other one is more of a habitual or recurring action, something that was more customary. So that distinction between context requires the first example to occur in the preterit tense and the second example to occur in the imperfect tense. And I have some information that might help you navigate these contexts. Let's take a look at a few more examples though here. I ate rice once, comí arroz una vez. Again, similar to that sort of isolated past tense example. Versus I used to eat rice. Here we have comía arroz. Now we're using different verbs, different structures, something like I used to eat rice, but it still implies that habitual, customary activity. And then I was eating rice, still going to be in the imperfect because it is sort of devoid of context. We don't really know a specific point in the past tense when that occurred. And so because it's loosely defined, we have that imperfect coming through. So the first part, when we're talking about contexts, first of all, there's a nifty acronym that I like to use. It's called SAFE WATERS. SAFE refers to the preterit context, and then as you'll see in the next slide, WATERS refers to the imperfect contexts. And these are the contexts that will require either the preterit or the imperfect conjugation. So the first one being a specific instance or a number of several instances. So in Spanish, le llamó 3 veces or él me llamó ayer. Really, to wrap your head around this is there's more specificity to these contexts, right? So 3 times, that sort of is a definite occurrence in the past. And él me llamó ayer, just the simple inclusion of yesterday sort of situates it really concretely in the past tense. And so we would opt for the preterit conjugation here. Action that interrupts ongoing events. So the way I like to actually describe this one, you can see the examples there of yo trabajaba cuando mi amiga llamó. Trabajaba is the imperfect tense of trabajar, so I was working. And then when my friend called, llamó is the preterit tense that happens here. So as a visualization for how this works is I draw a line like this. And this is the action that sort of was going on while another action occurred. So this is the imperfect verb conjugation. This would be trabajaba in this context. Well, if you have an action that intersects that interrupts it, something like llamó, that is going to occur in the preterit tense. Okay, so trabajaba and then llamó intersects that action. These intersecting actions that intersect or interrupt those ongoing events, are all going to happen in the preterite tense. The third context is a focus on the beginning or an end of an action. So it started to rain, empezó a llover. And then likewise, it stopped raining, dejó de llover. Okay, so those definite beginning or end actions in the past, we're going to use those preterite conjugations for those. And then finally, an enclosed amount of time. Now, this one is probably the most problematic context of the preterite because it does seem inherently to lend itself towards an imperfect context because it was happening over a long period of time, maybe lacking specific sort of definite occurrence in the past tense. And the reason why is because we refer to this chunk of time, this space of time, as one single unit, one single sort of occurrence in the past tense. And you can see that from the example. You see, los árabes controlaron mucho de España por más de 700 años. Right? So the idea that the Arabs controlled Spain for over 700 years, even though they were in control of Spain for a long time, a very long sort of even reoccurring time, we're referring to this part of history in sort of a singular context, in a definite context. And that's why we see the use of the preterite happening there. And here are the imperfect contexts. Now, some of these contexts are really nice. They're straightforward, black and white, and some of them start to lean in a little bit more towards those sort of ambiguous contexts like the preterite. When we're talking about weather in the past tense, we're always going to be using the imperfect. So it was raining, it was sunny, it was windy, llovía, hacía sol, right? Había viento. So all of those things are going to be expressed in the imperfect. Whenever we're talking about someone's age, like how old they were, we're going to express that in the imperfect as those examples indicate for you there. Cuando tenía 3 años, quería ser bombera. That tenía 3 años, whether it's when I was 3 or when I was 13. Cuando tenía 13 años, right? And hopefully you remember that when you express age in Spanish, it's having years, not being years. So we say, tengo 33 años, tengo 42 años. And so in the past, you take that tener verb and use that imperfect conjugation of it. Whenever we're talking about time as well, to express time in the present tense, we say, es la 1 de la tarde, son las 3 de la mañana, for example. Well, we take that ser verb and we use it in the imperfect when we want to express time in the past tense. Eran las 4, and that's it was 4 o'clock. Always using the imperfect when we're talking about weather, age, time. Emotion as well. Estaba triste. I was sad. When we're talking about the emotional state of someone, we're going to be using those, usually coupled up with the verb estar. We're using that imperfect form of that. Repetition, and this is the one that we saw in those examples earlier on. So this is the yo visitaba a mi abuela de vez en cuando. This was a habitual, recurring activity, so I used to visit my grandmother from time to time, and so we're going to see that verb conjugated in the imperfect. Visitar is an AR verb. It takes that imperfect conjugation, visitaba. And this last one is talking about setting or description. So, for example, the sun was shining, it says there, and the view was pretty. El sol brillaba y la vista era bonita. What I'd like to do is also just tell my students that when we're talking, if you think of sort of telling a story or even a plot of a book, the background information or the setting or description happens in the imperfect. And then the events that carry the narration forward, the occurrences usually happen in the preterite. That's sort of just another framework to get your mind around the imperfect and the preterite tense. So to say something like, I was sitting in the park, it was nice and sunny, and then all of a sudden a dog came and stole my sandwich. So the idea of I was sitting in the park and it was sunny, all that's going to be being conjugated in the imperfect because it's setting and giving description. But when the dog comes in and steals the sandwich, that happens in the preterite. So in Spanish, it might play out something like, estaba sentado en el parque, el sol brillaba y era un día bonito. y de repente me vino y un perro me robó de mi sándwich. So something like that playing out. And in this slide, I'll show you the entire acronym, and I know it's small, but here you can see the acronym playing out: safe waters, safe highlighting the preterit contexts, and waters highlighting the imperfect contexts. I'll leave you here with an up-close shot of a bit of architecture from Barcelona, Spain. This is Antoni Gaudi's structures, beautiful buildings in that part of the world. Very creative, very evocative. And I hope you enjoyed this explanation of the contextualized uses of the imperfect versus the preterite. Like I said, they are the most difficult parts of operating in the past tense in Spanish. You get the conjugations down, then you essentially spend years trying to work out these contexts. So once you have the explanation, for example, through safe waters, you then have to apply that practice and sort of feel out those different contexts and listen to the different contexts until you finally get it right. So suerte en eso, and we'll see you next time.